Yesterday, I arrived at the top of a track leading into a HR burn in our truck. Before we moved forward down the track, the first question from the crew was not how are we going to do this, but if this turns against us, how do we get out? Which is always a great question because you've got to know the way out to be safe when you're on the fire ground. That question would sound unusually negative in most workplaces. Leaders are usually encouraged to push forward, protect every project, and stick to the plan. Firefighters lead differently because the consequences of getting it wrong can be quite immediate. In this episode, I'm sharing leadership secrets firefighters use every day. We'll look at why you should plan your retreat before advancing and why things need to burn sometimes. Welcome to Leadership in the Line of Fire. By the way, if you're facing a leadership challenge right now and want practical one-on-one support, I can now offer you leadership mentoring. Visit leadershipinthelineoffire.com to find out how we can work together better. You don't have to wait for a crisis to become a better leader. So, number one thing firefighters do is a bit different. We decide where we'll retreat before we advance. And firefighters identify escape routes and safe areas before moving into a fire. It's normally done during the briefing so that everybody on the crews hears what they've got to do, can see where the escape routes are on the map, and can make any decisions needed in case someone else is injured. Most leaders these days only think about retreat when a plan has already failed. When you're dealing with a problem, you don't go into it without knowing when to stop and when to back out. It's a mistake. You often see in business people launch into projects because there's never any thought of what do we do if we fail? What comes next? And that's why sometimes I see some teams come to a shuddering halt and they just get stuck, and it's like they don't know what to do. And then someone else has to come in and step in and make decisions for them. Okay. When you're putting a plan into place, you need things like trigger points. Trigger points are actions or times or happenings that indicate that you've reached certain goals or that you haven't. So at certain trigger points, for example, when the fire burns to here, then we will do this. When we get through the first 3 steps of the sales process, then we'll do this. If this doesn't happen, then we'll do something different. Trigger points are things that we can look out for to make sure that we're safe and that we can make decisions when we hit them that are in realistic ways already made. We know that when we hit this trigger point, if this has happened, we do this. If this hasn't happened, then we do that. Don't go into things blindly. Sit down and put together a set of trigger points so that you know what you're going to do before you launch into that issue. We can also use timelines in a similar way with trigger points. We can set times where certain things are supposed to happen. If they don't happen, then it triggers a response. For example, lunch should be at 12. If at 2 o'clock you're still sitting at your desk working, then there's something wrong. It's not that you've missed lunch. It's the fact that you've actually gone without a break and you need that. It's part of fatigue management. Yeah, projects are going to be finished, but humans need to eat. So using timelines and trigger points together works really well. And this helps us, of course, deal with that decision of deciding where you'll retreat before you advance. Sometimes escape routes, when we're talking about general day-to-day life, are about quitting or turning your plan on its head. Okay, we talk about them as a way to get out of a fire, but you may look at it and go, okay, when we get to this point, if this hasn't happened or we haven't moved forward, then we'll quit. This just isn't going to work. This is not what we need to be doing. We should be putting our energy somewhere else. Number 2, letting the right things burn. This is a great one. On the fire ground, there's a lot of things that can be burning, but letting the right things burn is a huge decision. We don't try to extinguish every flame we see in front of us. Sometimes an area is too dangerous, it has little value, or it can burn safely without threatening anything important. For example, areas in the middle of the fire can flare up and carry on, and it really doesn't matter because they're 20 or 30 meters within the containment lines. Whereas if it's flaring up near houses and fences, well, that has to be dealt with straight away. So letting some areas burn while you deal with other areas is really important. And as a leader, you have to make those decisions. We also have issues with inaccessible areas where you can't get into. They're too far from the edge of the road. It's too dangerous to put people in. And sometimes we just wait for a fire to come out on the other side. We move crews around and we set a plan in place for when the fire becomes accessible again. In business, we'll often see people dealing with things and they lose sight of what's actually important. Yes, that is burning, but is actually not the major problem. The real problem is this client over here or this issue with this product, whatever it happens to be. So be aware of what should be burning and what shouldn't be burning. A lot of that will come from experience. On the other hand, it also can come from your project outlines and what you've got to deal with. In our case, we sometimes have things like trees burning in the middle of the fireground. Now, we don't want the fire going up the trees in most cases because it gets up the top of the tree and then it starts burning down through the joins and things like that, and we end up with issues. But in some cases, like if we're burning off an area that has paperbark trees, we may want those trees to actually burn. It's part of the process. So we'll actually candle them up front. We'll go around and we'll light the tree, it'll burn the bark, and then we light the rest of the ground around the tree. Again, understanding the difference, what needs to be burnt and what doesn't need to be burnt is really important. 90 times out of 100, we're stopping the fire going up the trees. But in special cases, we want the fire to go up the trees. So let the right things burn when you're dealing with issues. 3, give people permission to call danger. And that means giving everyone the opportunity. On the fireground, the newest firefighter can warn the most senior officer about a threat. Rank does not give someone a better view of a different part of the incident. We use the term LACES, lookouts, awareness, communication, escape route, and safety, as a way of reminding us that everybody has the role of being the lookout, being aware, communicating effectively, knowing the escape routes and knowing where the safety zones are. That's everybody's responsibility, not just the leader of the team. When your life depends on it, every set of eyes matters. And it doesn't matter what work you're doing as a leader. You want feedback from your team because what they're seeing is going to be different from what you're seeing. Not just because they could be in a different place, but because they have a different mindset. They have a different experience. Now, sometimes you're going to get what you would class as irrelevant reports, but what's better? A few irrelevant reports or someone not reporting something super important because they don't feel safe to actually tell you? I think I'd rather take a few irrelevant ones and teach that person that, thank you, that's awesome. Let me know when that changes or whatever the situation happens to be. It makes more sense to teach them than it does to just ignore them or admonish them so that they don't speak up. You don't want that. You want your team to be communicative with you at all times. They must feel safe to talk to the leader of the team. You won't see what other people see from their vantage point. I can be in one position on a fireground and the other person can be 200 meters away. What they're seeing is going to be entirely different given the terrain around us. So I need all those eyes as a leader, just like you do. It's always better to investigate the report that someone sends to you. So walk down and have a look or open up the file or whatever it happens to be for you and look at what's going on, than ignore it. It seems like a waste of time when you're a busy leader to do these things. The problem is that when you don't, that's when things go wrong. It's that old story that when you get lazy, accidents happen. When you don't bother to check is when things go wrong. And then you take all the blame because it is your fault. Someone did tell you something was going on. And for your own sake, at least, go and see what that person is observing. Number 4, watch what the situation is doing, not just what the plan says. Firefighters continually monitor the wind, the smoke, the terrain, and the fire behavior at all times. A plan created 10 minutes ago may already be dangerously outdated if there's been a wind change. On the fire I was on yesterday, we're doing a HR burn, as I mentioned earlier. The wind was due to change 3 times within the time we were supposed to be burning. It was going from southeast to the south to the southwest. So it was going to move around, and that was going to definitely affect the fire, and it was going to move the smoke around, which meant that Sometimes our teams would be working in really dangerous smoke, so they would need to be in full smoke masks. And other times they'd be in clean air. So even simple things like that means that up front, you know that you could get your team ready, make sure they know where their smoke masks are, that they're prepared for that wind change. And by monitoring those changes, we then are ready when it does change to quickly go and grab those masks, pull them off. Instructions need to be implemented based on conditions. When you give someone a set of instructions, they're based on what you're seeing at that time. If the person goes to do that job in 2 hours' time or tomorrow because of what they've been working on already, things could have changed entirely, and they may need to change the plan. Now, that may mean that they need to communicate with you and get an updated plan, or maybe you've given them permission to make the call. Maybe it's perfectly okay for them to make the call about how they're going to do that. Either way, trust your people and make sure you've trained them to think ahead that things could change, and that means the plan will change. We often see different weather on different parts of the fire because of hills. So the wind could be coming from one direction on one side of the fire and then go around the other side and it's coming from the other direction, which seems impossible considering there's just a hill in the middle. But that's the way that the wind works. It flows around hills and it comes around differently. It's just something that I suppose we accept as being part of the fireground. So we always observe the conditions in our own area and we take notice of what's happening on the other parts of the fire. It's the same for you. Remember, it's better to not do something than lose control. For example, you might want to slow down for a minute and just observe what's happening. I was standing on the fire yesterday and I was watching the way the fire was burning. And it wasn't burning particularly well, but it was burning in. And it would flare up when it hit dead grass, things like that, but then it would peter out. And this was a consistent sort of behavior that I was seeing. And so by stopping and watching it, I realized that we were going to have to do some in-depth burning. So someone was going to have to go in behind and light the fire up from behind. But we didn't just start out there. We lit the fire, we observed it, we watched what it did. We worked out on this part of the hill, we'd have to just let it burn. Other parts of the hill, we'd have to come back and burn later. And a third section, I went in behind and lit up some of the grasses in behind. It's sometimes better to do nothing. Get all that information by watching and then move forward. Don't just do what the plan says. Apply the plan based on the conditions. Number 5, protect your energy. Number 5, we protect our energy as carefully as we protect our equipment. And this might sound like a strange one because protecting energy sounds a bit woo-woo, but I'm actually talking about your endurance, your physical strength, all those sorts of things. As firefighters, we rotate our crews, we monitor hydration, and we recognize fatigue because tired people make dangerous decisions. Working someone until they collapse doesn't prove that they're a great firefighter and that they're committed. It weakens your whole crew, your entire operation. So it's not worth doing. We also rotate our team members through tasks. So if one person's working on the end of the hose, the other person's pulling the hose around behind them, they'll swap to get a break. The person nearest the flame gets a break from the heat. The person dragging the hose stops pulling and just is able to point the branch around. Some crews will be using rake hose to pull apart logs. We move people around so that they're using different muscle groups. They're using different bursts of energy. Sometimes it's a lot of high continuous energies. Other times it's simple lifting. And by doing that, you don't end up with people that are fatigued in specific ways, and everybody gets a little break by changing jobs. We all know that if you're digging a hole or carrying the bucket full of dirt away, you use different muscle groups. So when you switch, your body feels different. A good night's sleep is more important than exhausting your team. So don't always kill people. Send people home from work if they're tired, or if they've done their 8 hours or whatever your shifts are. Get them home, get them fed, relaxed, and then into bed and back again. Now, on the fireground, we have a rule of minimum 10-hour break. And there is a very good reason for that. When you've been out in the heat all day, and sometimes it can be 47 degrees air temperature, Celsius, and you're out there all day, you've got to get away from it. You must have a chance to cool down. Sometimes it can take me hours after I get home for my body temperature to come back down to normal. I'm walking around in the air conditioning at home and I can still feel I'm steaming hot because my body's been running in the heat for such a long time. So getting a good break, a full 10 hours, is really important for the body to fully recover, to fully refuel, and to get that energy back. We look after all our equipment really effectively, but often we don't look after ourselves. One of the interesting things is looking into 4-day work weeks as an example. We've always said that a 5-day work week or a 7-day work week or an 80-hour week, I don't see that as a badge of courage. I see that as stupidity in some cases. So it's important to get breaks. And as you get older, you're going to appreciate the power of a break and a nap a lot more. According to a 4-day week global study, 54% of Australians in the trials reported an increase in workability, moving to a 4-day work week. 64% reported a decrease in burnout, and 95% of businesses plan to continue under the new reduced hours arrangement. So there's lots of support and there's lots of proof around now that in fact making sure your teams have adequate breaks, that they aren't working as long, means that they can actually put in more work when they're there and work more effectively. So protect your team's energy as much as you would your equipment. Firefighters don't survive difficult conditions by being fearless or blindly committed to the original plan. We survive by noticing change, listening to every set of eyes that's speaking, protecting our people, and knowing when to advance, when to slow down, or when to get out. The same thinking can make you a stronger leader. Before your next major decision, identify your trigger points, your timeline, and your escape routes. Decide what genuinely needs to be protected and what you can allow to burn. Then ask your team what they can see from their position that you might be missing. Remember, if you're facing a leadership challenge and you want practical one-on-one support, I can now offer leadership mentoring. Visit leadershipinthelineoffire.com to find out how we can work together and book a chat. You don't have to wait for a crisis to become a better leader. Leadership isn't about forcing every plan to work. It's about keeping your people and your purpose intact when the plan no longer fits the conditions. Be the calm in the chaos, and when the moment calls for it, run towards the flames.